We're joined by moderator Walker Bruce. So this panel will run for the next 45 minutes, and Rama is the moderator. Rama, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. For the camera team and the online team, people, do we need to shift, or can you shift your camera so you can get both of us? Great, perfect. We didn't need to move. That's inclusivity in action. So I hope you all had a good lunch, because we will be doing a little bit of talking, but we're also going to get you guys doing a little bit of working as well. So if you have a pen, a paper, or even a smartphone, that would be great. You will be doing a little bit of work with the person next to you. So if you don't like the person you're sitting next to, now's the time to move. No one moved. You're all very inclusive. So my name's Rama I'm the director of the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design.
And I'm Sarah Clements. I'm Head of Inclusive Leadership at the Valuable 500.
So this session is a result of a partnership between the two organisations. It all came from the gentle power of dissatisfaction with the lack of inclusivity, the lack of leadership, the lack of inclusive leadership that I saw around me. And it resulted in this book, and the book really asks a number of different questions. So on screen are 6 questions in green tiles with black writing, and I'll read out the questions. So I'll be giving a visual description of each slide, and when I don't, it's just because I'm reading what's on the slide. So it's saying this is a book for all people, especially those who are never encouraged to lead. What if a leadership book was written by a creative and not just the traditional management structures? How can leadership help us achieve equity, diversity, and inclusivity? Why is creativity left out of most leadership manuals? Really importantly, is there a leadership model that includes all ages, genders, races, and abilities? And the final thing, those of you who would have seen my talk yesterday, I talked about inclusive design. So applying inclusive design, can it mend broken models of leadership? So, let's see if this works. Ah, yes, there we are. So the book you see on screen is the book I'm holding in my hand. Sorry, something has shifted in terms of the look of this, but the book is available at all major bookstores and online. And I know I don't have to tell you all this now because you all have copies already, I'm sure. But it asks 3 questions of how can creativity fix broken models of leadership? Empathy is core to leadership, but what other values balance it? And how do you achieve clarity in practice? So the book that I have in my hand is a sort of A5 size pale green book with a large white circle on it. Don't ask me what the white circle means. It was the graphic designer. Oops. Could we go next slide? I'm not sure if we're getting this. There we are. Oops, we've gone one too far. So what do people say about creative leadership? And it's this: if you want to change the world kindly, carefully, and quietly, then this is for you. Creative leadership is a learning experience truly celebrating people at its heart. I discovered that anyone can be an extraordinary leader when we consciously choose to opt in to our humanness. And, next slide. I think we're going to have to do a double act here. Creative leadership can underpin disability leadership, and that is the message of today. Can these values that have been developed for creative leadership help us talk about disability leadership? And I think, Sarah, that's very much the object of your work as well.
Yeah.
So we look at leaders having a deep this can mean leaders having a deep understanding and inclusion of disability, but also people with disabilities in a leadership position. And I think this morning we were talking about that evolution, that cultural change that needed to happen.
Well, leadership actually sort of decides what the culture of a company is. So when you're looking at disability recruitment, retention, training, culture, it comes from leadership. So it's really important.
Yeah, so it's those new models that are there. So next slide, please. Fingers crossed. So there we are. It's 3 values which are very simple and accessible to every human being. Empathy, clarity, and creativity. And on screen are 3 interlocking circles in shades of blue and green with those words written in them. Next slide. The 3 pillars of creative leadership, as we call them. Creativity is the universal ability to develop solutions that positively impact ourselves. So everyone can be creative. And the proof of that is you're all wearing radically different outfits. You know, no one's wearing the same outfit. You're creative. Empathy is the hallmark of a 21st century leader. And clarity is that link that aligns vision, direction, and communication. An easy way of remembering this is empathy is heart, clarity is head, creativity is hand. So head, heart, hand. Next slide. So it really came from a single insight. And I love this idea from a journalist who said it's using the people-centered practice of inclusive design to fix broken models of leadership. Next slide. We talk about inclusive design just to remind you all. I know yesterday was a far time away, but inclusive design is defined as including the widest number of people in your design. Next slide. And to remember the 4 axes of inclusive design. So on screen is a diagram which is a blue cross, and on each arms of the cross there are the words age, ability, gender, and race. And even when you look at people with disabilities, everyone is having a different age, gender, and race. So it's about that difference, that kind of expansion of culture. Next slide. And we need to talk about leadership because small numbers here make a big impact, positive or negative. On screen are 4 faces, 4 headshots. There's Barack Obama and Trump. I can't remember his first name. No. Can we go back 1 slide, please? And then bottom left is Greta Thunberg, and bottom right is, I thought it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it's actually Coco Chanel. Whether you agree with any of these people or not, they've made a big impact. Next slide. It's like I have a non-identical twin over there working on the slides. So if you go back. So the World Economic Forum talk about a changing landscape of leadership. They say we have a problem. Something is broken here. The old leadership model does not work and is actually getting worse. A big shift in management and leadership is long overdue. So next slide. So what this says is, wanted to do a little bit of a shout out. What are some of the personal myths around leadership that popular myths around leadership that you've personally come across? And on screen, we've got a couple that we wanted to share with you. Number 1 is you need to have a loud voice. So I heard that one at school, and I didn't have a loud voice. In fact, I was told I'd never lead anything at school, and I didn't. For a while. I believed that for a very long time. Another one is you have to wear a blue shirt and tie. So I was told that one about 10 years ago. And next slide. So this one is really important for this conference. You have to be fully able-bodied. And that's something that we have to tackle here. So just a quick shout out if you just stick your hand up and speak. Our friend here, Sumita, will write down some of the answers. Yes.
You have to be extroverted?
You have to be an extrovert. So true. Most of the people I've met here are introverts. Introverts in an extrovert role. So I love you all. Love being here, but when I finish this workshop, I'm going to go and either have a Tusker or watch paint dry. Other people?
You have to be a man.
You have to be a man. That's a big one. Others? Oh, sorry, could you repeat? You have to be educated. Yeah. And at a certain level, and in a certain way, and a certain thing. Any others?
You cannot be gay.
Yeah. You know, LGBTQ, IA plus, Latino X, all of these things. You know, when you look at this, we'll take one more. Anyone more? You have to have money. Yeah, you have to be in a certain socioeconomic group. And this is talking to the leadership of exclusion. So how many of us fit that characteristic? So one realization is 95% of us don't fit that model of leadership. Probably most of us in the room. In today's world, we see, in terms of leadership, centralization, top-down control, a lot of bullies in leadership position, and thank you for beautiful handwriting, better than me, so at least people can read it. You see individuals with visionary and imaginative capabilities being dismissed as dreamers, a lack of diversity. You know, it's the tallest, loudest, most alpha people, unless you're in Japan, in which case it's shorter for some reason. And very little disability representation. So on those axes, you know, you start to see leaders of different ages, different races, different genders, and even non-binary sometimes. But do you see people with disabilities represented? So next slide. So it'll say eventually, in tomorrow's world, what we need is less centralization, more trust. People first, strategy second, no excuses. And I can prove that to you. So how many of us have ever planned a day and it's gone exactly according to plan? Because it's never happened to me. So why is it that we create a strategy and then we think the world is going to go exactly according to that strategy? Put people first. Reality eats strategy for breakfast, as a friend of mine says. And finally, you need more disability representation. So we see this, and then the we being we, I'm not doing the royal we here. We see this as an opportunity to enable disability leadership. Next slide. Because otherwise we may end up with this. And on screen is a picture of Marlon Brando acting as the Godfather. I don't know if you've seen that movie. And below him is an even scarier character, Meryl Streep in The Devil's Wears Prada. And I actually had a boss like that. So I think that was more real for me, more scary. Next slide. I'm as excited as you to see what the next slide is. So what do people want from leadership? On screen is a picture of the world with most of it's grayed out, but a lot of it is colored in blue. The blue colorations are 34 different countries and regions that we did a consultation piece with. Next slide. We asked over 120 people, what do they want to see in leadership? And they said things like strategic vision, radical empathy, kinship, a learning attitude, inspired humility, deep listening for meaningful change. No one said shareholder, stakeholder, profit, budget management, or any of the other things you see in leadership management. There's a massive gap here. Next slide. There were 5 things that they spoke about, and we did a whole kind of neuroscience analysis on what they said, thousands of post-it notes. Number 1 attribute was active listening. Number 2 was empathy. Number 3 was adaptability. Number 4 was diversity. And number 5 was openness. And that sounds like the people in this conference. That sounds like accessibility. So we're at a starting point. Next slide. So we talk about creative leadership as open sourcing leadership. It's hacking leadership. It starts with you, internal first, external second. So you don't change organizations, you change people. It's transformational. Next slide. It's about people, and on screen are some images of people taking part in our creative leadership workshops. So there's an image on the left of me standing, and I think I'm telling a funny joke. I'm laughing, and luckily some other people in the room are laughing. And on the right is 3 women and a man at a table running through some of our processes. Next slide. Oh. Ah, magic, my friend. You are my hero. We've got the clicker working. And projects. And on the left, you'll see a picture of a 92-year-old woman called Betty in a wheelchair in a mock-up, a wooden mock-up of a vehicle that we were designing, the London taxi. I call it the Mickey Mouse of vehicles because anyone recognizes Mickey Mouse, anyone can recognize a London taxi. And on the right is a bridge in Northern Ireland where we did a project on suicide prevention and mental health. So this is where I think creative leadership can be applied directly into projects on accessibility, as you see on the left, and mental health, which is accessibility on the right. Empathy is a spectrum. So on screen are 3 images. You could have no empathy, like the Godfather. In the middle is a spoilt child who you kind of sometimes have empathy for, and on the right is the Dalai Lama, apart from his recent appearance in the newspapers, was a very empathic person. So that now comes with a health warning. Clarity is a spectrum. On the left is coronavirus. When that hit, we didn't know if you could catch it over Zoom. Could you catch it by looking at people? In the center is a weather vane, because, weather vanes change all the time. And on the right is a Nike slogan, just do it. Because I love the clarity of that. Just get up and do it. And so many times that's got me off the sofa. Creativity is a spectrum. So on the left, can anyone tell me what that is? I'm being a little exclusive here because I'm asking the sighted people in the room. But what's that on the left? The Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. So basically, the Eye of Sauron just did more evil of the same kind. It didn't really, it wasn't innovative, just more orcs, more killing, more whatever. In the center is an Italian shoe manufacturer who have traditional techniques, but they have to evolve their methods. And on the right is any museum, modern art, Victoria and Albert Museum, whatever it is. It's any creative space, like this. I don't mean the Radisson, but I mean the Inclusive Africa. So Sarah's beautifully color-coded on brand with a valuable 500. Can you tell us a little bit about what they do?
Of course. If nothing else, I am a brand. I'll give you a little audio description of myself, then a little intro into the Valuable 500 and the programme that we're running in conjunction with Rama and his team at the Helen Hamlyn. So I'm Sarah, I'm Head of Inclusive Leadership at the Valuable 500. I'm a white woman in her 40s, hard to believe, I know. I have a neurological condition, so it affects my balance and coordination, so I use a wheelchair. I've got brown hair, pale skin, and blue eyes. So if you're not aware of the Valuable 500, it was launched by our founder in 2019 at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Caroline Casey is our founder. She's a force, and definitely worth looking up. So the Valuable started as a campaign. It was to get 500 of the world's biggest companies to get their CEOs to sign up to put disability inclusion on the board agenda. So nothing was accepted unless it was the CEO's signature. That was achieved. If you know Caroline, that was done in super quick speed. And we are now a fully fledged organisation. We've grown enormously. We actually announced our strategy last week for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And working with our 500 partners, we're working on inclusive leadership, inclusive representation, and inclusive reporting. So for inclusive leadership, we've got a program called Generation Valuable. In simple terms, it's a mentee-mentor program, but really it's a leadership exploration program. It's it's in its first year and we've got 75 companies signed up. It's about looking at the disability talents that already exist within the companies. So the mentees, the Generation Valuable, are employees who self-identify as being disabled, have lived experience, or are caregivers to somebody with a disability. It's a really important voice within the community. So we wanted to make sure that was included. There are different aspects to the programme. So both for our companies and for the individuals. For our companies, it's an opportunity to hear from disabled talent within their organisation. And the mentor aspect needs to be an executive or somebody of C-suite level. And the reason for that is we want them to open doors, open conversations across different functions and divisions within the company. Traditionally, disability is talked about in HR. We want to see inclusion talked about in marketing, finance, procurement, in all the different divisions. In terms of the individuals, we want to give them amplification and opportunity to leadership skills so that they have personal and professional development. And we're working with Rama and his team, and part of the content of the programme is creative leadership.
Absolutely. So that program, I think, for us is a foundation of how creative leadership can power disability leadership using these 4 principles. We've been asked to contract the workshop a little bit because, we're running a little bit behind. So rather than doing a little bit more lecturing, we're going to go straight to doing an exercise. And we have 2 options. You can use a smartphone to log in, or we actually have some sheets and handouts in the room. So, my friend, if you could bring up the website that we previously had, the Slido website, that would be great. So we're going to be doing some active polling now because we want to hear from you. It's such a new and emerging topic. So hands up if you want a physical copy of this. So there's some people here. We would ask you to do this in pairs. So especially if there's people with accessibility needs that are sitting next to you, you can actually pair off and, be able to write things down or cite things down. Those of you who are a little bit more individual, on screen is a QR code. Hopefully, if you go to that, you'll be taken straight to the slido.com website. If there's a number for joining, it's 3694-699. I'll say that again, 3694-699. And for those of you who are online, we haven't forgotten you. This is why we did this. We didn't want you just sitting at home in your pajamas. We want you to actively partake. The question is, what are the barriers to disability leadership? And to explain that a little bit more, sometimes barriers can be time. Sometimes they can be trust. It can be risk. Is it risky to employ someone with disabilities? So, anonymously, please start to populate this. It can be one word. Yeah, one word if you can. If not, 2 words. And it should start generating a word cloud. There it is. So those of you who have the paper, we would love to collect that back off you. So just for our own illumination, we don't know everything. We want to learn from you. So please don't write anything of a personal nature that might identify you. So I'm glad to see the system's working. So what you see on screen being generated live is a word cloud, and the bigger the word, the more of you that say the word, the more people that, sorry, the bigger the bigger the word on screen. So you can see ignorance is absolutely 110% above anything at the moment. We have fear. So fear is something that I think we come across a lot. What stands out on this screen for you, Sarah?
Fear, the stigma. Statistically, there are disabled leaders out there, but people don't like to come forward and disclose. And there is a lot of stigma and fear around that. So, yeah, I think low self-esteem. Knowledge is a big one. People are really scared of saying the wrong thing.
Yeah. And a gap in the CV. That's a really super specific one. But if you have a gap in the CV, people actually believe that you, what have you been doing? You should be working all the time, 24 hours a day. Cost, the cost of adaptation, the cost of retrofitting. People think about the cost of disability as an employer as something insurmountable. So it's really coming to life. Lack of will. I think in the companies that we work with, we see the opposite. There is a real will to do it, but outside, how do we step beyond this lack of will? Low self-esteem, that's come up on the outside. So I'll carry on reading some for people with visual disabilities in the room. Language barrier, jobs are not hiring, rejection, trust, perception of disability, illiteracy, structural barriers, and I think we'll be talking about some of that in the next panel, but in the context of disaster. Not able to work daily. Actually, who is? Whether you're disabled or not. Understanding fully, or you're registered disabled or not, I should say. Loss of self-esteem, low esteem, lack of exposure, and understanding fully. I think that's brilliant. Do we recognize these as barriers to disability leadership in the room? You know, nod your head, shake your hand if you believe it. Yep. So if we can go to the next poll, so that would just mean hovering the mouse at the bottom of the screen. Sorry, not next slide, but on the Slido, there's the second poll. So if you go back to the website. Yeah, so there we go. So how can we overcome the barriers for disability leadership using the creative leadership principles? So here, what I'd love for you to do is to have a couple of minutes conversation with the person next to you. And remember what I said, if you don't like the person next to you, go and find another one. There's 7.8 billion people on the planet. So have a couple of minute conversations with the person next to you and then start to put your answers down on this. So we have lots of lines coming in. Address the knowledge gap, education, continuous reinforcement, make the space, challenge the norm, people before profits. Empathy will support reasonable accommodation, advocacy and awareness for creativity, and creativity to support accommodation with available resources. You know, as creatives, we say you're given a budget and then it's halved, and you're given a time scale and then it's halved. Creating awareness and leveling the playground, acceptance, mentorship and building awareness, and nurturing strengths. So whilst, please do carry on filling this in, because we will be taking this, again, the we being the valuable 500 and the centre, we will be taking this on board and putting together a whole tranche of material around disability advocacy and leadership. So we have sort of 10 minutes left, which we'll just finish off with a couple of things. So if we could go back to the slideshow, thank you. Creating awareness to give leaders clarity, I love that one. So that is what we'll be doing with creative leadership. So do carry on this. I actually have a colleague live in London who is on site right now recording this.
Sorry, Rama, to interrupt. Let's observe silence, please, as Rama is presenting. Silence, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, but I kind of hate to silence when there's energy in the room. If we had a bit more time, we'd get you all up and about. You'd actually be dancing around with each other, eating cake and kind of going outside and doing this exercise. So just to finish off, some very quick things on our definition of empathy. If you only have empathy, you could be a pushover. If you only have clarity, you could be a dictator. If you only have creativity, you could be a bicycle with pedals but no chain. You're kind of pedaling hard but going nowhere. Forbes said this in 2021. Empathy is the most important leadership skill according to research. When people are excluded, when people are suffering, when people are hurt or experiencing hate, I don't believe we should be arguing about whether empathy, sympathy, pity, compassion is right. I would say what we need to be doing is kindness. So that's a universal word. In Sanskrit, we call it devotion. So it's called bhakti, which is a mixture of active devotion. If we can go to the next slide, I think the clicker needs some coffee. There we are. So we define empathy as the ability to recognize, understand, and reflect on the thoughts, behaviors of others. Next slide. On screen is a cartoon which shows the difference between sympathy and empathy. So on the left, is the sun shining brightly but kind of laughing, and it says too much underneath. On the right is the moon being cuddled by the clouds, and it says just right. So sympathy can be too much. My father passed away 3 years ago, and the amount of times people kept on coming up and saying, "I'm sorry, I knew you since you were a baby." And a friend of mine who was a busy mother of 3, she turned up just with a bucket of food, took out a plate for me, put it in my hand, and then left to pick our kids up from school. There were lots of people turning up at my house giving sympathy. She turned up and gave me food. That's empathy. Next slide. And it was curry, Sumita. Just referencing your talk earlier this morning. Boston Consulting Group, who have been doing transformational work for years, they said CEOs who are inclusive, leading with emotion and empathy, are more likely to succeed in creating lasting change. So the data is there to prove it. Next slide. And what are the most important words in the English language? What do we want to hear? Any offers? Next slide. It's usually "I love you." I always say it's "I love you too," because if you say "I love you" and no one says it back, you may be slightly stuffed. But actually in creative leadership, next slide, it's these words: "I see you." So if you go to the next slide, I just want you to consider, when you walk away from this lecture, who don't you see? Who haven't you seen? Who haven't you thanked in your life? And it could be your family. So, I often talk a little bit about ex-girlfriends. One of them actually gave me the idea of clarity as part of the model, because when we broke up, I was just like, what the hell happened there? And I wanted clarity, and then I got a clarity that I wasn't going to get clarity from her. Another girlfriend who I still work with, at the end of each day, she would do this thing of just saying, "Thank you for filling my car with petrol, thank you for doing this," and I started it doing back. And that was this bit of "who don't you see?" Because at the end of each day, most days, even if we were annoyed with each other, you would still thank them, you would still see what they did. So I'd like you to think about your personal and professional lives and think of one person and go and thank them. And you don't have to bow down to them, or just acknowledge what they did. Next slide. So clarity, next slide. Clarity is a clear understanding of the vision and direction of the project or of your endeavor or of you. It's the ability to effectively communicate this to a variety of audiences. Very simply put, clarity is when what you think, what you see, what you feel, and what you do are in a straight line. So it's also how to get a good night's sleep. Because if you have that, apart from jet lag, of course, but if you have all of those things are in a straight line, you don't need to worry about anything. Next slide. So there's a cartoon here which says consistency to clarity. Because people often think clarity is consistency. And the very worst thing I heard in my leadership journeys is an ex-teacher at school saying, "Make your mind up and stick to it, even if you're wrong, because if you change your mind, you'll look weak." And what a load of rubbish. So you need to be like these two horses. The one on the left has blinkers on, and it's in tunnel vision. The other one doesn't have blinkers and can see the bigger picture. So as a leader, especially in the accessibility space, you need to make decisions as more information becomes available. Next slide. So I'm just going to miss this one. Next slide. So on screen is a diagram which for me was a really powerful expression of clarity. So the slide is in two halves. On the left half, you have the words provider's perspective. And then you have lots of little circles saying Department A, Department B, Department C. That's how most companies see themselves, as different departments. On the right, and there's an arrow shifting us to the right, is customer's perspective. And there's one big circle saying seen as one experience. So think of Coca-Cola. No one cares whether Coca-Cola's research department or accounting department is better, or Google's accessibility department is better than their leadership or their product development. When you buy an Android phone, when you have a Coke, it's seen as one experience, and that is an absolute lack of clarity that people have. And one of the most important things we do when we work with a company is get them to use their own stuff. And in accessibility terms, it's amazing. We worked with a major Korean phone manufacturer, and they weren't getting the accessibility stuff, and we gave them £20 each, their executives, and said, go out, buy a phone for £20, because that's what a lot of people have, come back and set it up and ring me, you have an hour. And the mobile phone shop was just around the corner. No one managed to do it, because it was this. They were seeing themselves as different departments, they came back and they actually paid to do a project on setting up the phone. So put people in a situation of experience, especially when it comes to accessibility. Next slide. Creativity, we're getting there. Next slide. So we just say creativity is the ability of an individual or group to utilize their intellect, skills, and resources to develop solutions, services that are novel, useful, and I don't know, something happened to the slide there. Probably inclusive. Let's put the word inclusive in there. Next slide. So the cartoon here goes from originality to creativity, because people often come to us as designers and creatives and say, I want something original. But actually, what you need is something that's useful. So on the left is a gorilla lifting a log by himself, and underneath it is the word brawn, and he's struggling. On the right is a group of mice, a family of mice, lifting the log together, and it says brain. So we're going from brawn to brain. Next slide. We say creativity is the clouds, innovation is the earth, and design is the rain. So there's my little plug. I told you I come with a health warning. I try and push design everywhere. So design is that bit that links the clouds to the earth. So use designers. And there's a couple of designers in the room, like my friend Enos, if you can raise your hand. The bravest man in the world, he lent his Volvo last year to Julius, Julius? For Julius, who's blind, registered blind, to drive. But he's also a designer, so we wanted to, actually see haptically what was going on. The image on screen is from Singapore, and it's just a picture of clouds about to rain on the earth over a cityscape. Next slide. So when we think about the barriers to disability leadership and inclusivity and accessibility and creativity, it can often look like this. It can feel like a marathon. So on screen, it's probably a little bit tiny, but there's a little person running a marathon. So on the left, the little person first reaches the mountain of process and has to climb that. Then they have to navigate the shark pit of mindset and not fall into a shark's mouth. Then it's budget, and that's always a downhill conversation. Has anyone ever walked into a meeting and your boss has said, hey, you've actually got more money? It's never happened to me. Then you're swimming in the sea of the lack of support. Then you're navigating the obstacle course of risk. Then is the mountain, the high altar of bureaucracy, how many forms you have to fill in. And then finally, if you get through all of those barriers, you're stumped by time. So, and then next slide. And next slide. We'll skip a few things. So just to finish off, next slide. We run programs and workshops open to all humans. And on screen, you can see a really complicated diagram full of squares and circles. Just to say that, this is the process we're taking through the 75 companies at Valuable with. Did you want to say a little bit?
Only on we're doing a blueprint for action. So we're lucky, and the companies, the partners that we have at Valuable 500 are all companies that want to work on disability inclusion. But their questions to us are always, how? What can we do? How do we get started? And companies are at different points on their disability inclusion journey as well. Then you have to factor in different sectors, different geographies, different sized companies. So what we're working with Rama and his team on are blueprints for action, where the mentees and mentors are working together and creating something specific to their company. And this relates back to the conversations they're having with different members of the C-suite in different areas of the business. But the blueprint for action they come up with will be specific to their companies. And it's something that the Helen Hamlyn are actually supporting our mentees and mentors with. So we've got some phone calls and sessions set up to help and support them in creating that.
Fantastic. And I think the reason for putting this up is just to say one of the most often asked questions, and even at this conference, is, really like this idea of inclusive design, creative leadership. How do we do it? And so this is just to say we're really open to conversations, and we sort of, personally undertake to anyone who wants to talk about this and how they might deploy it. We are here, and we make that sort of commitment, even that promise. So if you look at just on this diagram, just literally on the left, it has the person, creative leadership. You transform people, not organizations. And at the bottom is projects, and that's inclusive design. And halfway through this, there's a big circle saying organization. And that's when we bring in the organizational challenge after we've done some personal transformational work. And that even involves some yoga. It involves some very humanistic things. And then at the end of it, as Sarah was saying, is an outcome. So final couple of slides, if we go to the next one. So these are some of our blueprints for action. And you probably can't read it on screen, but they can be anything from a product to a guidance document, to a manifesto, to a training screen. And next slide. This is the last one. Or even instructions, even a gamification. So whatever those 75 companies need, there's a choice of 10 things that they can pick from. But actually the choice is infinite, because if what they need is not up there, we'll help them design it. But the main thing is we don't want to come in as kind of new style colonialists and tell people what to do. Creative leadership is about enabling the individual and enabling you all with all your heads, hearts, and hands. So thank you.